There are writers who seem to step into the zeitgeist of our times, writing that lifts us up and makes us laugh and reminds us to find the humor in all things. Carl Hiaasen is that writer, a best-selling author and award-winning journalist. He brings his sharp wit, keen eye, along with a deeply felt political and environmental conscience to his innumerable books, both for adults and for young readers. Carl will be joined today in conversation with our own storied writer, best-selling author Elin Hilderbrand, along with her partner in podcasts and our Nantucket Book Foundation president, Tim Ehrenberg, for their podcast, Books, Beach, and Beyond. And this is an inaugural event for their amazing podcast, and if you aren't following them, it is the smartest, funniest, most entertaining podcast that really captivates an audience. So that they have created this today with the Nantucket Book Foundation and Festival is pure joy. So please give a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Mary. How lucky am I to be in conversation with these two powerhouse writers? Let's give them a round of applause. Carl, you did not bring Florida weather, though. I'm kind of cold today. You didn't bring the Florida weather.
No, it's 91. Would you rather be?
No, actually, we'll take this.
Yeah, I do too.
So Ellen and I always like to start with origin stories, and before we get to your writing journey, I kind of want to know about your first memories of reading and what books you remember as a young boy falling in love with.
Well, as a lot of little boys in my generation, I remember reading all the Hardy Boys books and thinking that was really cool. And then I read a lot of sports biographies that those days there was no internet, but they had a lot of Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, all the athletes that I followed. And so my experience reading the Harding Boys was I always wanted to read the next one, and I thought it would be just a cool gig to have a job where you would write something that people would actually want to read and then keep reading. And I didn't know that the guy, there was no Franklin W. Dixon. I thought he was a real dude. He was a Canadian novelist who was doing it as a side hustle because his other books didn't sell. That was instructive too.
Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what about Carol? Now let's dig in here a minute, because who read Nancy Drew, right? Probably the rest of you.
Yeah.
And that was Carolyn Keene. Was she also not a person?
I believe that was also a pseudonym, but I could be wrong. But
we have to look this up.
Yeah, but I know that Franklin W. Dixon was a pseudonym. Yeah, and but I didn't read Nancy Drew. My mom would let me.
Well, at what point in your reading journey, because I was a big Nancy Drew fan, and from Nancy Drew, I started writing my own little books when I was, 7 or 8 years old. At what point in your reading journey did you realize that you wanted to be a writer?
I was pretty young. I was probably that age, 6 or 7. I knew I liked to write little stories, and I was very interested in newspapers at the time as well, and it seemed also to be a great gig to be able to, because in newspapers I knew that if you went in, you got to write every day, and you were definitely going to get published because they needed something to fill the hole in the newspaper. But so, in that sense, I was very lucky and probably unusual to know that at a young age I wanted to do that, yeah.
How did that journalistic background that you had turn into fiction then?
Well, I'd actually written some fiction while I was in college as a ghostwriter or silent writer. A doctor at Emory University, where I attended for the first 2 years, had tried to put together sort of an autobiographical novel about his time in medical school, and so we met to the English department, and he got the book published. I think Scribner's published the book, and to me that was a big. I thought, God, that's actually out there. And then the second book we did together got turned into this movie with Michael J. Fox called Doc Hollywood. And again, I wasn't credited. Neil rightly got the credit, but it was still very encouraging for a young writer to, you see it, you can actually get published. So I had no dreams about making a living doing it. I just thought it was kind of a cool thing at the time. But it built your confidence, and that's probably how I got started.
I think it's safe to say a lot of people here are ready for some laughs because you've been making us laugh for years with your books. I want to know those stories in your journalist time that were almost the truth is stranger than fiction?
Well, Florida, look at. There were so many that, and I always say there's things that I can't, that really happen that you can't put them into a satirical novel because they can't be improved upon. And there was, I mean, I do have clippings that I saved and try sometimes to get them into the books, but in the early days, I wrote a couple novels with a reporter, 3 novels with a reporter at the Herald who was also an editor there, and those were quite traditional thrillers that we collaborated on, and they were ripped out of the notebooks. At that time, the cocaine wars had started in Miami. This was in the mid-'70s, and so we wrote a novel about the beginning of the cocaine wars, long before Miami Vice, and then about drug smuggling in the Keys. You might have heard they had a little bit of that. Those were the marijuana days. And then the third one was set in China because Bill Montalbano, my friend and my partner in writing, was one of the first Western reporters ever to be allowed into Beijing at the time. And so we did those together. That was pretty much really just using our own notebooks. And I'd written about an assassin, a drug assassin who'd come to Miami from Colombia, and his nickname was El Loco. But now, this was so long ago that by the time I left the Herald, and if you went on the Herald, into the Herald archives, there'd be 4 or 5 of El Locos. He was the first of the many El Locos that we had. So Bill Montalbano had said to me, we should write about this dude, And I said, yeah, let's write about a paid killer. Sure, what could go... He did get arrested, and finally, but also I didn't think he was much of a reader. It didn't sound like he was much of a reader.
So my first experience with the Carl Hiaasen book was in 1994. My ex-husband and I were trekking in Nepal. And for those of you who've ever trekked in Nepal, when you're not actually doing your trekking, there is absolutely nothing to do. And anybody who is trekking to Everest Base Camp goes through a town called Namche Bazaar. So Chip is here today. He is your biggest fan. Chip and I were in Namche Bazaar, and he went down to the lobby to look at the little selection of the little hostel library, and he came up with Double Whammy and Tourist Season, and he was a serious Elmore Leonard reader at that point, and he's like, I think I found my new guy, and he then proceeded to read everything that we could find by Carl Hiaasen. That was a long time ago. Okay, that was 1994, 31 years ago. How has publishing changed, and how have you watched publishing change since that time?
Well, with trepidation, there's a lot fewer publishers now. When I first started, my agent's here today, and she'll back me up on this. But you could submit a manuscript to 10 or 15 different publishing houses, and you always felt like there was a chance. And now there's really a group of about 5, and depending on what kind of book you're writing, some of them are pretty specific. And I think it's harder to break in now. I mean, Double Whammy was a book. I mean, this is a good example. It was a novel about sex, and murder, and corruption on the professional bass fishing circuit. Yeah. And I was trying to sort of claim that literary landscape for myself. I think I did. But I just remember my editor at the time, Neil Nyron, flew down to Florida, and he knew nothing about fishing, nothing about, this is bass fishing now is sort of the NASCAR of fishing, but at the time it was just, and then we had these cheating scandals. People were cheating at fishing tournaments because the prize money was so big, and they'd stuff, weights in the fish before they lifted on the scale. They took bribing, yeah, anyway. So I didn't think in a million years that book could get published. And I'm still amazed. I'm almost certain it couldn't get published now. I still am amazed because there were so many twisted little aspects of this pit bull attack that went on for about 100 pages. The guy adopts the dog; it's hanging on his dead dog. It was so gruesome, but and somehow, bless his heart, Neil got them to publish that. So I don't know that was probably, I think, in '87. I think, and I don't think you could get that book sold or published very well today.
Isn't that so interesting? And then, I mean, can you talk a little bit about how social media and the marketing of your books. I mean, back then, were you going on tour?
Yeah, I did go on tours back then, and then as now, I argued that maybe that wasn't the best use of money, was sending me on a book tour. But then they would come up with these numbers. I don't know how good they were. They'd say, "Oh no, look, here's what it did. Here's what it did." But yeah, back then, and then then the pandemic happened. You couldn't tour, and I thought, maybe that would mean the end of book tours. And then, of course, I get the sad news that no, it's not going to be the end of book tours. So, but it is different. The social media stuff, I'm not very good at that. You're better than that than I am. I'll post things because they want me to post things, and I have folks that do it for me. But I've never, I'm not saying this to be arrogant or anything, but I don't read anything on social media that's said about me. I don't. I mean, I had no writers who read every little critique from, and some guy in a boxer shorts and black socks in a basement writing about your book. I mean, my feeling is, who gives a shit?
So you've been hailed as America's finest satirical novelist, and in an article that just came out a month ago, you said it's getting harder and harder to write satire. Can you dig in here?
Well, this is impressive that all of you aren't at the parade in Washington today, but that's kind of an example. I think I feel like we've all been living kind of in a Tom Wolfe novel for a while, and that some of the things that have really happened, if you had invented them as a novelist, a satirical novelist, I always apologized at these events. I start out by apologizing for Marco Rubio, Pam Bondi, all these Floridians that have made their way like hungry little ticks up to Washington to attach themselves to the corpus of government, and Matt Gaetz, who is almost our Attorney General. That's what I mean. The stuff that's really happening is hard to even imagine that it could. I think, when I came out of journalism school, Nixon was president. We thought it was the middle of Watergate. We thought that was the end of the republic. He fired an FBI director, and his Attorney General left. And it was, but now Nixon looks like Gandhi.
So, a lot of your novels, but especially Fever Beach, are subversively political. And when I write my novels, I try and make it a pure escape. I don't always succeed, but I try and make it a pure escape. But you want to engage. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think after a lifetime in newspapers, and I wrote a column for 30-odd years for the Herald, that I get up in the mornings and you give your opinion about something, and when you give your opinion, somebody's not going to like it. And if everybody likes it, then you haven't done your job. But also, here's the question for me was always, when I stopped doing the column a few years ago, how do you stay quiet in these times, and why should you stay quiet in these times? And with Fever Beach, I was interested. I knew what the country, the amount of weight that's on the whole country right now, and I thought, well, maybe they could use a breather. I'll take something more of a lightweight theme, like white supremacy. I thought, just take a breather, read, have a few laughs. But it's sort of I was interested in doing something that involves sort of the banality of hate. Hate that they profess to have, but nobody can explain or tell you why. And we have a fair amount of that in Florida. The Proud Boys originated in Miami. They're from Miami, and Moms for Liberty. They're down there doing their threesomes and all their kinky stuff. That's serious. That's what I didn't know what Moms for Liberty meant until that case in Sarasota where one of the co-founders was sending her husband out to recruit women from bars. So this is what I mean, you can't make it up. he would take pictures. He was, by the way, did I mention he was the head of the Republican Party in Florida at the time, handpicked by Governor Ron DeSantis. So this is what I mean. I spent all my time apologizing for Florida. But anyway, they were into all this sex stuff, and she was leading the charge against transgender and gay literature, trying to purge all of that from the schools. And at the same time, they had a very active social life. But he's no longer chairman of the Republican Party. Apparently, some of the transcripts and texts came out, and I don't know what he's doing now. He's probably running a church down there.
Kind of sounds like Florida makes your job easier, though. It's a lot.
It does. I mean, after I quit writing the column, about 3 weeks or 4 weeks later, the Matt Gaetz story first broke, and I was crushed. I thought, it was a slow pitch down the middle of the plate, and I wasn't there to swing at it, You
have some pretty outrageous characters in all of your books, but Fever Beach especially. And Elin always says when she creates characters, they're flawed, but you can sympathize with them. Do you find any redeeming qualities in some of these people, like Figo, Jonas
and Dale, the white supremacists? No, it's interesting. At one point, and these guys set it up a little bit. They're starting their new white supremacist group, because they've basically been 86th from the mainstream white supremacist groups, because there was one of them was up at January 6th, and he took a dump on a Confederate statue instead of Ulysses Grant statue in the Capitol. So the Southern faction of the Proud Boys had him blackballed or I guess whiteballed if he in his thing. But anyway, yeah. I mean, the trouble is they're out there, and my neighborhood, they ran around, they threw all these plastic baggies with this screed, anti-Semitic screeds, on everybody's driveway, and everyone, normal people, were just merely disgusted. And I was beyond disgusted, because I started thinking, well, this is a two-man job. It took two idiots to do this. Somebody had to they were weighted down with sand, with rice or sand, and one of them had to pour that in. The other one was stuffing the hate literature. And so there's two of these morons out here. What would their lives be like in a novel? And so I said, like Dale and Jonas. So that's how my brain works, is I'd really like to try to figure out what makes them tick as slowly as they tick, I
mean, your main character, it's come up several times, is Florida.
Yep.
You grew up there. And I want to know, how has it changed? And I want to know what you love about it.
Well, I was born in Lauderdale, and in the same hospital my dad was born at, and the same hospital my oldest son was born at. And the population, for one thing, there was about 5 million people in the whole state when I was born. Now there's 22 million people. And it's a collision of all kinds of cultures, but it's also just cramming a lot of people into a place that didn't have the infrastructure to handle it. What I've always loved about Florida was the outdoors. I lived in the Keys for a while, and the Florida Bay, and just the water, and the Everglades, of course, which is a place I still try to get down to a couple times a year, because there are places you can get in small boats in the Everglades where you never would think even another human had been there. And as long as those places are down there, I think it's worth fighting for and staying, but it is discouraging what the politics and of course just the sheer weirdness of the stories. As I said, there was a story the other day that I was sure it happened in Florida. When I saw it on the news, I said, "Oh, that's got to be in Florida," and it wasn't. You probably saw this. I was kind of encouraged that it wasn't in Florida. There was a traffic stop, and the driver had been arrested in the car, and in the front seat of the car was a raccoon with a meth pipe. Did you see that story? No, they had the body cam from the cop, and the raccoon's sitting there, and it's like holding the meth pipe the way you hold a meth pipe. And when the cop reached in, so I thought, that's got to be a Florida raccoon, and it got to be a Florida meth. And it wasn't. It was like Ohio or somewhere. Yeah. So we don't have the market completely cornered yet.
So I've set 27 of my novels on Nantucket, and the thing that concerns me the most when a novel is published is how the people who live on Nantucket respond to it, right? Because you want to get it right, and you want to feel like you're portraying it authentically. How do the people of Florida react to your novels? And is anybody, I mean, I have this all the time, as I'm sure you do too, the people that say, let me tell you my life story, you want to write a novel about this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I avoid those people. But you're right. But Florida is so vast, and the panhandle part of the state is completely different politically and culturally from Key West or from Central Florida, the Disney part of Florida. It's all so different. I trust that after this much time, I know it pretty well. But you do get different reactions in public, and you get things sent to you. But usually it's in the form of, you've got to listen. You think that story was well, you've got to listen to mine. And I never, and one of the things, again, it helped being in the newspaper business, being a columnist, is because you were used to sort of taking flack. You didn't have time to sit there and read, and if somebody wrote a letter to editor saying you were, they hated this column or they hated this story you wrote, you were already on to the next case, and I think that's important. And I think you've been here long enough, you've got a sense, I'm sure that, you don't want to mess up, here's what I don't want to mess up like geography or street signs or directions, or because I'll get letters about it if I got one thing wrong. Usually I used to get letters about guns. I used to get letters from gun aficionados who would say, no, you didn't mean, it wasn't a Glock 9, you meant a Glock 10 right there. And I go, okay, fine, it's already in print. Want me to send a letter to the Glock Corporation, apologize for it? That kind of thing. You got to be careful with firearms and street signs in Florida. Those are the two main things. Yeah.
So there are 28 other authors here, and last night Loretta J. Ross wrote a book called Calling In, How to Start Making Change with Those You'd Rather Cancel. Now, in reading your books, there's so many people I would like to cancel in them, but I'm wondering, how do you go about listening or making change to those characters?
I don't know that you can. I think you just keep sticking up for what you believe in, and I think the books, in my case, clearly it's a component of my psychiatric care. So I'm honestly, and I think if most writers are honest, most fiction writers, you're writing for yourself. You're the first reader and the first audience, and you've got to like it yourself. You're putting your name on it. So I don't think you start out trying to change anybody's mind, but I think in my case, I just want other people who feel the same way, who feel the same frustrations, because most satire comes from a sense of this injustice and wrongdoing, and you hit that note that they're getting it for the right reasons. I've said that before. It's one thing for them to say enjoy your book, but it's another thing for them to get those characters, because they know those characters. Are you going to change them? Probably not. Again, they're not. I did this book called Squeeze Me that had a certain presidential-like figure with a Palm Beach mansion, and everybody said, "Oh, aren't you worried about what Trump's going to think?" And I said, "The man doesn't read. What? He's very proud of the fact that he doesn't read. He can read, little few things on the social media, but they're giving him his intelligence briefings orally now." Verbally, because he wasn't reading the folders, which, So, no, was I worried he was going to read it and get upset? No, I'm not really anyone in that whole genetic tree. I'm not that worried about them reading it. None of them.
I would say that most of us here love your books because they're funny, right? They're humor. When I was reading Fever Beach, came up with the phrase, which I'm very proud of, your novels have an exuberant specificity. So every line has something specific that we can enjoy or hang our hat on. So like when Dale Figo is, he's texting and riding his bike and he runs smack into the side of a truck, but it's not just a truck, it's a termite truck, right? And every detail is carefully considered. And can you talk about like how many times, like your process in coming up with all of these sort of exuberant, exciting, vivid details?
I think that's a product of newspaper work as well, because and especially when I was working on the Sunday magazine, the Herald had a great Sunday magazine for years. I mean, and I also worked with a reporter who'd won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. His name was Gene Miller, and I sat next to him in the newsroom, and I remember listening to him be interviewing someone on the phone about something completely different in the story, and he would just out of the blue say, "So you're in your office now?" And yeah. What's on the wall? Do you have what kind of paintings do you have on the wall? What's your office look like? Things that most reporters, you just can't. But so he was setting up the opening part of his story, but it was just the detail that made it so much different, so much easier to read. And I think that's where it comes from, because you just keep asking questions and you're absorbing. And I feel that way with dialogue too. I don't know how you feel about it, but when I'm reading a novel where a character makes a 2-page speech that's perfectly cogent and cut up into paragraphs, I've never met that person before. And it drives me crazy. But that's the way I felt when I first started reading Elmore Leonard. The dialogue, he had cops down, he had paramedics. He knew how people really spoke, and it's very rarely in complete sentences that go on and on and on. So I think for authenticity, it was something that I wanted to use the details. And details can be, very. I mean, they can carry the story forward.
Yeah, I mean, your details, every single one feels very carefully and intentionally chosen, right? And moves the story along. Ditto your names. I mean, nobody names a character like Carl Hiaasen, right? That is the truth. Do I even ask, because people ask me how I get my names, and I see 10,000 women a year, so I often will keep a list of names. How do you come up with these things?
It's not uncommon for me to write 3/4 of a novel and have one of the main characters. I suddenly don't like the name doesn't fit anymore, so I'll come up with something else. And because you can do it on the word processor, you keep trying out different names, and it's very seldom I keep the same names. And I don't know, it has to look a certain way on a page, and it has to. The other thing, when I was young and I read, it drove me crazy. If I was reading a giant Russian novel or something, and I'd lose track of the characters, and I'd have to go back and read and track down the characters again. I wanted the names that stuck for the characters that were, that were going to be around for the length of the novel. Yeah, I do spend a lot of time. In this book, one of the white supremacists named Jonas Onus, and I'm sure he carries somewhat of a burden because of the name, but he also kind of deserves that name. You know what I mean? So I do spend a lot of time on that. I don't know I don't know exactly where it comes from, but it does help me especially as the story's going forward, seeing them fit in a certain role.
We only have a little time left, and I want to get to some audience questions. So I'm going to prep Elin for this question. You wrote a little graduation book called Assume the Worst. It's like the anti-graduation speech. It's hilarious. It's only like 25 pages. How many people know it? Okay, not many.
Okay, everybody has to go get it. It's in book form.
It's hilarious. It's graduation this week.
Especially if you know someone who's graduating.
Yeah, it's graduation this week on Nantucket, and so Elin, take it away.
So my question is, Nantucket graduated 143 seniors last night, and I just want you to speak to Assume the Worst, and it's very, I read it, it's very pragmatic advice, a little jaundiced, right? A little skeptical. You don't think so? Could you talk a little bit about it?
No, I mean, it's totally skeptical. It's basically the world is doomed. The subtitle of it is called "The Graduation Speech You'll Never Hear," and part of this was because I didn't want to have to get asked to do any graduation speeches. But secondly, it was also just things are dark, things are terrible, and the bottom line I think all you can do is show up and not shut up. But yeah, you're getting lied to every day The government's going to lie to you. Everybody, you know, it's really, it's not uplifting. But but it is what I would tell anybody that asked me, that it's shitty, but it could be shittier.
Yeah.
You know?
I think my favorite part was when you said, you know, people out there are every single day are going to be jerks. And so when you go out, you need to do something to counteract the jerks. And so that's your job every single day.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just, you know, I'm sure all of you have flown Spirit Airlines at one time or another. And you get off the plane thinking humanity is, well, we're just never going to recover. But you trudge forward, and that's what you have to do. You navigate your way around these people. I mean, I do hardly have some faith, and it takes people a long time sometimes to get pushed to a point to react, but they will react, and they will stand up and do the right thing. I believe that. And there's the other thing I deal with in that graduation book is there are just a shit ton of stupid people out there. I'm sorry, but there are really, really stupid people out there, and God help them. You know, they're gonna. If a president says Mexico's gonna pay for the border wall, they're gonna nod their head and actually believe it. And there's all you can do is sort of pat them on the shoulder, and next case. Honestly. There's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing. You've got to propel the species forward if you can.
Okay, Ellen and I always like to wrap up with a little bit of a speed round, and then we'll get to some audience questions. So, you ready?
Sure.
What writer makes you laugh the most?
Dave Barry.
You came prepared.
Well, you know, he's also a good friend, but that's absolutely true, though. He always makes me laugh.
Who are your auto-buy authors? So who will you automatically buy a book if they write one?
Well, anything Karen Russell writes,
Yeah.
I'll buy. Tom McGuane, when he's writing. I don't read as much. When I'm writing fiction, which is almost all the time, I'm not reading fiction. But so I'll take Eric Larson. I'll try to read more nonfiction. I do it consciously. I just don't want to be unconsciously influenced by another novelist when I'm in the middle of, you know, my own books.
Are there any of your characters from past books that you still think about today?
Sure, I think about Skink a lot. The ex-governor who's in a lot of books, because I wish we had somebody like that in real life. I mean, he went crazy. His backstory is he goes crazy when he's in Tallahassee, in only a matter of months, and tears off his clothes and runs into the woods and lives off roadkill. Which is, if you ever been to Tallahassee before, anybody? Yeah, okay. But I still think about it because I brought him back in several novels. He was in Squeeze Me, but he's getting old and you know, even crankier. So I don't know, but I do have an affection for that character.
Who else does satire well?
Oh, I think, well, I used to read Martin Amis all the time. I think Gary Steingard is great. I think, I always liked Christopher Buckley. Christopher Moore is very talented. I like those guys. There's just not a lot of people doing it. And I think that's because it's hard. Humor is hard, you know. I mean, you can be... you're writing a little stretch of dialogue, and if you get the rhythm wrong, or you get one line wrong from one character, it sort of kills the whole thing, and it's tough. I think it's, and I also think it's not an easy market either. I don't believe for writers, because you know, of the times we're in right now, it's. People desperately need to laugh, but it gets harder and harder to laugh yourself in the mornings if you put on the news and see what's happened. So,
if you were going to write a nonfiction investigative journalism book on any topic or event, what would it be about?
Oh, if I were going to do a whole book, oh God. I mean, I would have. To be serious, if I was a working journalist and doing it, I would be working on a book about the corruption in this administration right now. the grift and the amount of and those books will all get written after the fact. By the way, everybody you see representing when you turn on the news and now speaking for the White House in one form or another, they're all working on books, every one of them. We'll have to suffer through all of them when this administration is over. The only, I mean, there's just corruption has always been something I'm always interested in. It's huge. And it's transparent. I mean, it's prideful corruption. I mean, there's not even close to being any shame involved. So it should be a little easier to get to the root of it. And I can't wait to see the new jet. I don't know how about you feel. Oh, sweet ride. I like that.
And then the last question, what are you reading right now?
Right now, I'm finishing a biography. I got an advanced copy of a comprehensive biography of Jim Harrison, who was a writer, is also a friend of mine, and I loved him a lot. And he, a great poet and novelist from out west. And there's a biography coming out in November about him. So I'm finishing that up now.
Yeah, Legends of the Fall, right?
Yeah, Jim wrote Legends of the Fall.
Have you ever heard the story about him writing Legends of the Fall? Apparently, when he did his edits, he changed one word. And I'm always like, what word was it?
Yeah. I didn't know that. I know that he was editors had a challenge when it came to Jim changing anything. So the one word was probably a victory for some editor because he didn't like to have anything changed. But anyway, that's what I'm finishing up right now.
Okay, who has a question for Carl?
Carl, I have a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old son, and they love your stories. And I wanted to thank you for writing stories that engage boys in a way that girls can also be engaged, but you've really caught their attention and kept them reading for just forever. It's great, and they're still readers.
Oh, that's good. They didn't start on like striptease or anything.
No. It's more like Hoot.
Hoot, okay, that Hoot's better.
Yeah,
thanks.
The young reader books. But
Now,
what circumstances propelled you to go into writing for kids? Because I'm so thankful for your writing.
I'm very thankful that I did it. I was so skeptical. There was an editor in New York who had asked me if I'd ever be interested in writing for kids, and I said, have you not read any of the grown-up books? Why would you want a child anywhere affected by me? But they said, look, they love the humor. They care about the environment, wildlife, and the clean air, clean water, and they love it when people make fun of adults. And I thought, well, my whole life in journalism has been making fun of adults. So that's where the book Hoot came from. That was just those are pages out of my own childhood with these little burrowing owls that were going to be wiped out by a developer. And in real life, that happened where I grew up. But the good thing and the selfish thing about the fiction is it wasn't going to happen in the novel. But that's where it came from. It was only going to be one book. It was one knockoff. I mean, that was the one, and I was gone. And then the reaction was so great. And the kids' letters which I get to this day, are so great. And now I'm meeting kids in their 30s, not kids, grown up, that are scientists, biologists, wildlife officers, and they all say they started with that book, Hoot. And so I had no idea, but it was the best thing I ever did, probably for my own mental health as well.
And tonight, he'll be in conversation with Jason Reynolds at the Dreamland talking more about that, which I can't wait for.
Yeah.
Another question? Over here.
Thank you for being here. My question is about the adaptations of your books to the screen. I'm sure many of us saw Bad Monkey this past year, which was awesome. And I think, if I have it correct, is it Skinny Dip and maybe one other that are also being adapted? What is it like to see so many of your works coming to the screen? And do you get to have a say in how the books come to life on screen?
That's very funny. Do I have a say? Well, they're always very nice to me, as nice as they can. And and Bill Lawrence, who did Bad Monkey, and they're doing a second season of it. I have to trust his casting. He's the one that got Vince Vaughn involved. But he was hung on to that book for 8 years. He believed in the book, sometimes I say no probably more than I say yes. But in that case, that one turned out well, and I enjoyed it too. But most of the time, they'll talk to you and they'll keep you posted on what's going on. Like, I remember when they were shooting striptease, everyone was nice to me, everyone was great, but the movie was supposed to be done, sort of ready to go. And I remember they were nice enough to call me, and this is, if you've ever written for Hollywood, this is the call you don't want to get. It says, yeah, we're all ready. We decided we're going to reshoot the ending. You go, oh God, that never means it's getting better. But in any case, my writing is so tough because there's so much of the humor and the energies in the narrative tone, and it's a tough thing to put on a screen but I will say with streaming TV, at least you have a number like 10 episodes or 8 episodes for character development, which is a luxury, I think, because in a movie you've got a 110-page script to boil it down to, but when you've got 10 episodes, so that's been encouraging. I don't know, I have the most modest. I've used this line a million times, but if you're a writer and selling your book to Hollywood is like turning your firstborn child over to the Charles Manson Daycare Center. I mean, if you go in with that attitude and you think, well, this is what I'm doing, then you're ready. Then you're ready to do it.
I think we have time for one more.
You just throw it, lob it over there, Tom.
Thanks you. Two-part question. Who is your favorite philosopher? And second part, if the book title is Steal This Book, do you steal it or pay for it?
Well, I'll answer I can answer both. This Abbie Hoffman is my favorite philosopher, and I wouldn't steal his book. No, that's a cop-out. I don't know if I have a favorite philosopher. You mean in Latin or the English translations? Socrates. He's a philosopher, right? Oh, yeah, Socrates. That's the guy.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.